It's okay? Bom dia a todos. Vamos iniciar a aula inaugural deste ano do curso de pós-graduação em Processos e Meios Audiovisuais, trazendo hoje como convidado especial o professor Coeckelbergh, da Universidade de Viena. O professor trabalha já há alguns anos nas áreas de filosofia da tecnologia, ética da robótica e inteligência artificial. Mestre pela Universidade de Anglia Oriental da Grã-Bretanha e doutorado pela Universidade de Birmingham. Professor em 2007, ganhou o prêmio da Sociedade Holandesa de Bioética. Ele é professor de Filosofia dos Média e de Tecnologia da Universidade de Viena desde 2015. É presidente da Sociedade de Filosofia e Tecnologia e professor afiliado de Tecnologia e Responsabilidade Social da Universidade de Montfort, em Leicester, Grã-Bretanha. As primeiras obras falam de liberdade e autonomia, papel da imaginação na discussão moral. Nas obras mais recentes do professor Coeckelbergh, ele trata de problemas do desengajamento e distanciamento no uso da informação e de tecnologias de comunicação. Seus principais livros são Ser Humano, um Risco, sobre a vulnerabilidade e a tecnologia, propondo uma antropologia da vulnerabilidade. Habilidades ambientais, onde ele argumenta contra as formas modernas e românticas de se relacionar com o ambiente, meio ambiente. Máquinas de dinheiro, onde ele discute as novas tecnologias de informação e comunicação aplicadas ao mundo financeiro. E Novos Cyborgs Românticos, onde ele investiga a relação entre tecnologia e romantismo e discute o que ele chama de fim da máquina. O professor Coeckelbergh também é muito procurado pela imprensa britânica, imprensa holandesa e pela imprensa europeia em geral. Ele tem falado sobre a ética da tecnologia e dos drones. Ele adverte contra a confiança crescente que está se atribuindo aos algoritmos nos mercados financeiros globais. E ele adverte também que estaríamos delegando coisas demais à tecnologia e que perdemos o controle e a influência societária nisso tudo, né? O professor Coeckelbergh, eu o conheci aqui em 2014, quando o Filocom organizou um encontro internacional chamado Triangulação Internacional da Comunicação, que contou com a participação do professor David Gunkel, da Universidade de Illinois, em Chicago, com o professor Dieter Mersch, da Universidade de Zurique, e com o pessoal brasileiro aqui da ECA-USP. Naquela altura, o professor Coeckelbergh participou da primeira discussão em setembro de 2014, através do Skype. Em 2015, no encontro que tivemos em Zurique, né, aí sim, então o professor Coeckelbergh pôde participar das discussões sobre comunicação e alteridade e a questão do humano e dos robôs. Hoje ele vai falar sobre o filme Koyaanisqatsi, o filme de 1982, Vida Fora do Equilíbrio, de Godfrey Reggio. O interesse aqui no nosso departamento e na pós-graduação da USP em Meios e Processos Audiovisuais é a discussão da relação entre os humanos, a natureza e a tecnologia. Como vocês sabem, Koyaanisqatsi é um filme sem texto, né? É um filme apenas de imagens e música, né? Exatamente porque o diretor acha que a língua está em uma situação de humilhação. Então, no caso, se trata, portanto, de um cruzamento, né, entre o cinema e as questões humanísticas do homem ligado às tecnologias. Aqui do meu lado, a professora Dora Mourão, também do programa, que eu acho que gostaria de falar algumas palavras.
Bom dia a todos. Muito rapidamente, em nome do Programa de Meios e Processos Audiovisuais, agradecer a presença do professor Coeckelbergh e agradecer ao nosso colega Ciro por ter oferecido a vinda do professor Coeckelbergh, que estava convidado já para alguma outra atividade, e achamos maravilhoso, porque o importante para o nosso programa é ter essa visão sempre bastante ampla sobre as nossas questões, e o professor Coeckelbergh, conversando rapidamente com ele agora no café da manhã, ele dizia, bom, eu não sou da área propriamente dita, eu sou de filosofia. Eu falei, não, mas para nós é fundamental que outras visões que tenham a ver com, obviamente, a nossa área, outras visões possam ser ouvidas e conhecidas para ampliar o conhecimento. E, de qualquer maneira, a nossa área é uma área multidisciplinar e outras visões são necessárias, além de serem bem-vindas. Então, agradecer mais uma vez. Ciro, obrigada. Professor Mark, muito obrigada. E vamos lá.
Então, sem mais demoras, vou passar a palavra ao professor Mark Coeckelbergh. Ele é belga, ensina, como eu falei, na Universidade de Viena. Quase não fala português, quer dizer, entende uma outra palavra de português, mas não estaria em condições de responder perguntas em português. Mas talvez perguntas vindas do público possam ser traduzidas por quem esteja mais à vontade com a língua inglesa para entender. A palestra vai ser proferida em inglês. Por favor.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Ciro for the invitation, and also here the director of the postgraduate program for the honor of delivering this lecture. I hope you understand me. If there are problems, or if you want to ask your question in your language, please do so. I think we can find solutions for that. So let me start with the lecture. To do so, I would like to give a short overview of the film to you visually. Let me. This for sure will work. Where is the? Okay. So this is just, it's actually a quick version of the movie, and I thought this is not too bad as an introduction to Koyaanisqatsi, because Koyaanisqatsi itself is made by time-lapse technique. So this is a fast-forward version of the movie, which is itself a fast-forward version of whatever it represents or whatever it does, because representation, as you know, is a problematic concept, perhaps. So this is, here you see in the short overview, you see first all kind of images from what we usually call nature, all kind of phenomena there. And then I go a bit further, because after a while the movie also shows urban environments. So there's almost no speaking in the movie. It's images, moving images. Okay, I will stop here and go back to the presentation. So first for some details, because many of you are from film studies. So the director is Godfrey Reggio, an American director. The music, we heard some of the music before, is from Philip Glass. So often characterized as minimal music, contemporary music. Yeah, the film is from the 80s, but I think it's very interesting still today, especially in connection with thinking about technology and thinking about our relation to nature. And so that's why I've chosen it for today. I'm not from film studies or audiovisual studies, but I look at this from the perspective of philosophy of technology. So it's a very specific take on the film. I'm sure many of you will also have to add other things to this. But this is where I come from and what I will do here today. So this is the background where I come from, but I'm used to move in this kind of more interdisciplinary environments. For me, it's more interesting to do this rather than staying only in the discipline of philosophy. And I think through the very nature of film studies, audiovisual journalism and so on, you're also used to this, to do this. So this will work well, I think. What I will first do is give some interpretations, first of all by the director himself, then also by Gregory Steffens, who looks at this from the point of environmental thinking. And then I will make my arguments about the film. So one is about the topic of romanticism, where I will use my book also, New Romantic Cyborgs, which thinks about technology and romanticism. What does contemporary technology have to do with romanticism? And I think from this angle one can interpret a film. And then also a second theme next to romanticism that will come in this lecture is the Anthropocene. So here we ask the question about technology and the natural environment. And so I think these two topics provide good angles to interpret a film, but also my main purpose is not so much to interpret a film, but the main purpose is to say something about the relation between technology and nature. So especially the technological mastery of nature, and in the context of modernity, where we have this difficult relationship to technology, to nature, and where there is a tradition of romanticism, romantic thinking, which is, I think, still very strong also today. And then, of course, something that's in the background for me always is the new technologies, the new media, digital media. This is in the background also an interest. But the focus will be on the theme of romanticism and Anthropocene. So let's start with some interpretations by Stefan. I don't know if some of you know the journal Screening the Past. I don't know if you know that in film studies. But this is an article which I found interesting as a first interpretation of the movie. So first, the movie Koyaanisqatsi, like for people not familiar, I always see spelling mistakes and so on, but here it was done rightly. The title is chosen especially for people not to have preconceptions already before they see the movie. Usually language is not neutral. Language already frames what we perceive and what we will perceive. So when we go to a normal movie which is text-based, it has a title and it already frames, language does things, and then the images come in. So that's for one reason, and the other reason is that it's relates to Hopi language, native North American Indian tribe, which is for Reggio very important, because the Hopi word Koyaanisqatsi means life out of balance. So something is not in order, something is unbalanced, crazy, in turmoil, disintegration, and starting from there, the longing perhaps for a different way of life. So this is the meaning of the word, and the interpretation by Stefan stresses that this is still a narrative in the movie, but one without words. It's not only that we don't have the cultural baggage because of the word, but also that afterwards, when we have the images, that it gives us a different way of understanding, a different way of looking, I wanted to say, but that's already stresses the visual. So you could say that because many people say, there is no narrative in the movie, but one could say there is a narrative, but it's a visual narrative. Through the movie, one could say you can see things, and in particular we can see things that are hidden and visible at the same time, because we live in our modern times and it's all out there already. So what the movie shows in a way, especially the urban landscapes, but also the nature, if you travel and you go to these places, it's there. But at the same time, what is shown in the movie through the patterns that it shows, it reveals things that are there, and that we live in it, and therefore we don't see it, and we especially don't question. For me, this connects also with the way I read Heidegger, the language of revealing. It's a phenomenology, I think, that reveals and makes things visible, but at the same time, it's already there because we are living it. The patterns in the movie, I think, are nicely mirrored in the music, where in the music there is repetition and simple structures, and this is also in the visual language, so to speak. You can find it. So there is some correspondence between the visual grammar, one could say, and the grammar of the music. And then, of course, the theme is definitely also technology. You see in the urban part of the movie a lot of technology, the cars, the big city. This is very, very clear. And it's often the really big cities of North America, and I would say for this it's interesting to give this lecture here, because the urban landscape and the urban life here in Sao Paulo is actually very similar to what is shown in the movie. Also, the question then is, if we see all the technology and all this urban environments, really, so it's everything is urban, everything is technology, we live in technology, and the question is like, is this a kind of second nature? Is this a new nature? Because we become so much accustomed to live in this urban environment that it becomes a new kind of urban jungle, an urban environment where we at least that is the modernist idea, where we then can have a life and feel good. The romantic reaction against that is like, no, we don't feel good in this new nature. So this is in modernity the discussion in the background always. Because there has been a lot of, by philosophers and others, a lot of criticism of technology and modern society. The question is if we produce these gigantic cities, these enormous technologies and architectures, if they're not overpowering us, if it's not too much, if we can live in such machine that we created. And in the film, this theme, which is also a theme of really the classic philosophy of technology, which is always very pessimistic about technology, the film suggests is that technology is out of control, especially the cars, the traffic, the industries with their pollution, and that these cityscapes that we created, that they dehumanize, that they are really not suitable for humans. So this kind of part of the film is really well in tune with the classic philosophy of technology. Contemporary philosophy technology, my field, is more optimistic, or at least tries to be more nuanced about technology. So it's not just saying only bad things about technology and modern society. But 19th century and 20th century philosophy of technology, perhaps we can also add philosophy of media, is like this. It's very paints a very dark picture of what happens, and part of that is also in the movie. But I think we can also read it differently. So I will come back to that. Here I mentioned Marx, of course. Also in the literature, you see references to classic sources in environmental philosophy, which similarly has been very pessimistic about what happens. But nowadays, also there are more nuanced versions, and there are more other ideas that say, for example, well, what is this nature that we want to come back to as romantics? Or maybe there is no such thing of nature, and maybe this is a utopia that we construct, so there's a whole discussion there too. That being said, there is the theme of danger, the theme of risk also. I have argued in my book Human Being at Risk that new technologies, they try to do away with the danger. They try to make things in a way that there is less risk. They try to make us less vulnerable. But when we take away one vulnerability, or decrease one vulnerability, we increase another one, because the technology itself creates new risk and vulnerability. Yeah, so we don't live anymore as hunter-gatherers, where there were enormous risk. If you didn't catch the animal, you might die of hunger and so on. We now live in this very protective, climatized environments, which shield us off from the harshness of nature. We can go to the supermarket and so on. But at the same time, these architectures, these foods and so on, they have their own risks and problems. And they make us vulnerable in new ways. So there's always one always creates. There's a kind of dialectic there. So in the film, these problems, I think, come to the foreground, are revealed, and I really like Reggio's idea that. It's not so much about technology, but that everything exists within technology, and we live technology because technology has become ubiquitous. So we can no longer think of technology as being mainly this tool, a tool where the human is totally in control and we use it to do something. But we think of the tool as just a part of everything, and as something that always is under the control and manipulation of the human. But here technology is something ubiquitous, something that is everywhere, that is actually an environment, a milieu, more than a tool. So this is interesting for philosophers of technology. So this is also actually a thought I had when I came to Sao Paulo, which is the first time I come to Brazil, and also first time to Sao Paulo, that my host is Ciro, but my host is also the big city and the technology. You know, you feel that you are entering in the technological, big giant technological machine, and this connects also to a theme that we have in philosophy of technology for a long time, which is the claim that technology is autonomous, has its own imperatives and directions. Now, I don't think that there is determinism. I don't think that technology is something that we totally cannot control, or that totally goes its own course. But there is something with technology that it is true that technology is not a mere instrument, a mere tool, that once it's there, especially modern technology and especially contemporary technologies, the digital technologies we have today, they take their own course, and we do not totally control it. And it does create this environment, which for me is not a separate environment like a digital sphere or something. No, the digital and the non-digital are interwoven in our lives, and so there's one techno-cultural thing. It's not that there is a separate digital or virtual world anymore. Maybe this was in the 90s the thinking, because there was a desktop computer which was a separate thing you go to, and then there's a screen, and you have the feeling that you're entering a separate reality. And we talked about the internet as a separate space, but now there is one mixed hybrid space. I think digital, non-digital, offline, online. We no longer have this separate sphere, and so I think already in the 80s, with other technologies in this film, this is also shown that. That there is the human and the non-human, but here the stress is, like in classic philosophy of technology, very much on the danger, the threat. Think also about Heidegger, the danger. So Stephens, in his interpretation, talks a lot about the visual turn, that, as I said in the beginning, there is a narrative structure. He calls it a non-logocentric narrative structure. Why do we always need words, or why do we think that words are the best way to, I want to say describe something, but describe is a metaphor already from text-based technologies, from language. So here Stephens argues rightly that there is a narrative structure, and this narrative is definitely about a human nature relationship, and still, it tells something, but without words. And this is, of course, very old. We tell without words. For example, in medieval times, the paintings in the church, for example, just to give an example, but there are many more. And of course, in the ancient cave paintings, which are also in the movie, you can also see that. And then, it seems like when we make this kind of images, there is beauty in it. And so then the question is, but it's beauty, but it's beauty, the beauty of the danger and the beauty of destruction also. So could this maybe be problematic, that we watch our own self-destruction? And there he quotes Benjamin, so I come back to that because I also thought this quote was very apt for thinking about this problem, especially also in relation to romanticism. So there, the film shows patterns and shows things about the human-nature relationship, how we deal with that, how technology separates us from nature. That's romantic language, I would say. But also that technology becomes a new nature. So the visual narrative is about that. And this mirroring is really interesting. As I mentioned already, there's the images of the nature's movement, but there's also the movement in the urban environment. And so these patterns are similar. And if that is the case, the question is this a kind of new nature that takes off and that replaces the old one? Is it how much is this all in control of the human, and how much is this new patterns that are bigger than us and that start replicating themselves? And yeah, this is not new in a way, to look at nature and use it as a mirror. We have always done that in modern times, especially. And the city itself, you could say, becomes then also a machine, because the technological metaphors become very important. If that's what's happening, if we really live in technology, of course, the language we use, visual and non-visual, verbal and visual, will all refer to this technology. We can only speak in a way because we have the body we have, but also because the environment we have. So all this shapes the metaphors we use for our thinking. Our thinking is not separate from our embodied relation to the world around us. So the city becomes this machine with the patterns, and it is tempting to then go to today, because in the 1980s, in the film, all the patterns of the traffic are shown and so on, but we have today the patterns of the data in the digital, and we have all kind of informational patterns. So maybe today we could say we don't only live in the city as a machine, but we also live in the web, the internet as a machine. And there you can ask the same question: to what extent is this still a tool, and to what extent is it a milieu environment and something that really determines things and is out of control. The film, what the film would comment on this is to bring up the Hopi prophecies that it has in the film here, in a rare moment in the film when words are used. If we dig precious things from the land, we will invite disaster. This connects to also the images in the film of mining with big trucks and so on, with the landscape that is really destroyed and changed by the humans. The cobwebs in the sky, the ashes we can think of, for example, the cobwebs we can think of in the internet, but the ashes is also interesting because for me it connects to this theme of the Anthropocene. I will come back to that, but it connects to the question: do we want to change the atmosphere of our art by geoengineering, by putting stuff in the sky, and then the rays of the sun will be diminished, so there's less global warming, and there are all kind of crazy ideas there to geoengineer the planet. So these are it's just interesting quotes to think about that. And then in the film, of course, there's also, you can read it as a call for change, as many of the critical films and critical literature we have, luckily tries to stimulate change, social change, environmental change. So, but the question is always like, what kind of change do we need then? I would say the overpowering feeling in the film is that something is wrong, but I would say that's easy to say. Many of us have this feeling, but it's much more difficult to think about alternative, like how to deal with this. And this is also the problem in the Anthropocene. So let's zoom in then to the two themes, Romanticism and Anthropocene. So I already mentioned my book, which sketches this kind of more cultural background, also influenced by cultural studies, to interpret technology. And the argument is that, more generally, that of course Romanticism is against the machine generally, in the sense that it's against technology, it's very critical of technology, talks about technology as a danger. But at the same time, when I look closely at this period of Romanticism in the 19th century, but also in the literature later about Romanticism, there are romantics who also did something with technology, so and who had a more positive view of technology. So as usual, cultural movements are very hybrid and diverse. It's not just that we can have like one line. So of course there is in the 19th century, especially in a European context, there is the feeling in the beginning of the 19th century that the gods are gone, basically. The science and technology leads to disenchantment. Weber is a very important figure there. Interestingly, of course, he did not really claim that there is no religion anymore, but rather that a particular form of religion has produced disenchantment, namely Protestantism in the form of Puritanism. And another source of him was also Schiller, who wrote about the aesthetic education of the human, and in particular about the flight of the gods, so this idea that there is disenchantment. Also in Heidegger, where the technology is seen as a danger, you find the same idea. The background is this disenchantment, which we can find in the romantic poems of Hölderlin. Also, Heidegger was very, very influenced by Hölderlin. We can, when we are now talking about film, we of course have to mention Walter Benjamin, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. I guess in film studies you read this every day, this essay, so to speak, where the similar kind of argument, the new technology has, in this case, film, according to Benjamin, no aura, no mystery. The bodies are deprived of life. There's flickering on the screen, and he longs for a time when you have still the mysteries, for the cults, the ritual, the magic. In his case, the references are Stone Age, ancient statues of gods, and also Madonnas covered nearly all year. I was thinking about that when I went to Spain, to Andalusia, where they had just at the time these processions where they bring out the statue, and before it's covered with textile, so you cannot see the Madonna. Anyway, so this is a very typical argument. Philosophy of technology, 19th, 20th century is very much like always the new technologies are always condemned as the ones that are that lost something which the older technology had. In this case, it's film. Today, people make the argument that the video games, for example, are not so good. Maybe film was still good, but not the video games. or maybe the internet is good, but the new social media are bad. And so always a new technology is accused of taking away something that was there before, of being somehow antisocial also. I still remember from my studies that I learned in that the communication theory, there was a lot of stuff about television that was very bad. Nowadays, I would say sitting together around the television looks like a focal, a warm activity, similar to looking at a fire, compared to sitting each of us with a phone. So, but this happens all the time in modern times, especially that we think about the new technologies as, you know, as bad as compared to the older ones. So I see this as a form of romanticism. But if you actually look at the tradition of romanticism, then there is actually there also more ambiguous work, and I find this, for example, in also in Europe, because I also talk about how, for example, Mary Shelley was from Frankenstein, you know, was very interested in technology, especially through her husband, also who would work with scientists and so on. And they were poets, but they also talked about science. I think this is nice. You know, we should probably all do this kind of very transdisciplinary thing. But there's much more to say about this, but I select here because the Koyaanisqatsi is in a North American context. In North America, you see also the more ambiguity, because on the one hand, here my source is Leo Marx, The Machine in the Garden. You see that for example, the locomotive of the train comes into the nature, disrupts the idyllic picture of the natural life, the pastoral kind of idyll. But at the same time, there is a suggestion in the North American thinking that we can have the pastoral ideal with technology, so that the two can go together somehow. So interesting, because it's different from, let's say, Heidegger. Also here in to go to literature, which is of course also translated in film, Melville's Moby Dick, where there's also there's the sublime threatening death and destruction. At the same time, as a romantic, one is very interested in the sublime. The sublime is from this tradition. So there's a threatening here of the nature, but it's also enjoyed somehow, or there is some attraction to this threat. And one could also apply that to technology. Maybe the threatening destruction of technology is also enjoyed. So this gets us back to Benjamin. But to come back to the film itself, so I think there is ambiguity there. There's opposition between romanticism and technology, but also promiscuity, alliance. And if we look at the specific images, we can see, on the one hand, the romanticism against technology, when the Hopi tribe is presented as some kind of image of the untouched nature, the paradise lost, because this is always a very important narrative in these pessimistic readings of technology. A very known Christian narrative. That's the first, the paradise, and then something happens, the fall, and with technology, and then the question is, can we have a kind of liberation from that? So here in the film, when images like this are shown, a very nice image, I think, where it's untouched nature also. So it's the images from the tribe, but also the untouched nature, like the Horseshoe Canyon in Utah. I didn't go there, but I went to other places in the US to see this kind of what we can only describe with romantic language as moderns as sublime nature. It is very impressive and overpowering. But yeah, one could say in the film, this maybe is romantic, right? Maybe it's longing. Life is out of balance, but maybe there was at some point a balance, when we live together with nature and with each other. So this narrative, I think, is there in visual form, visual narrative, as said. Also, one can see very well this idea of the sublime, but then instead of only the sublime in nature in the first half of the movie or the first third of the movie, in the urban part, I would say it shows also the technological sublime. For example, in the image of a big Boeing 747, the kind of planes that one takes if you move between America and Europe. This is technology becoming sublime, where there is the threat and at the same time the enjoyment of the threat or the aesthetic pleasure in the threat. In my book, I argued that we have this also today with our new technologies. When there, for example, the robots and the games that give us some kind of magic, or the augmented reality as a kind of re-enchantment of the world. We find our, in romantic terms, our daily reality in the office and so on, we find it too Philistine, we find it too boring, and we look for something more interesting. And then the new technologies, they promise that. They promise to take us out of the reality. So it's trying to bring back the magic. Maybe the film also does that to some extent. Then it's about technology, the film, but it's also about how we relate to the environment, which is itself a question for technology, because technology is the way we relate to the environment. So for me, environmental philosophy and philosophy of technology are not two separate things. And so let me say something about the theme of Anthropocene and then relate it to the movie. So the theme of the Anthropocene means that human activity becomes dominant on the planet, that we have what they call, because it comes from geology, that humans have become a geological force. So the claim is not only that we do all kind of things with nature, for example, this mining and so on, but that the whole planet and its climate is changed because of the humans. And so if that is the case, if that is true, then one could say that the Earth or the planet, that is no longer just natural but technological at the same time, so that the nature and the technology are becoming one. And this is especially a conceptual way to deal, I think, with the issue of climate change, where it's no longer clear what is now nature and what is human intervention. If it's true that climate is changing, but but why? And it's clear that the human has a hand in it. But so the human and the nature are together. So Anthropocene is just one way, I think, to conceptualize the entanglement of human and technology on the one hand and nature on the other hand. Now one can criticize this notion because there are humans around here, but also a lot of non-humans in our world, and maybe this is too anthropocentric. Also, there's a kind of we in this, like we are a geological force, the human, and so on. But in fact, some people pollute more than others. Some people are more destructive or have more influence on the climate than others. Some individuals, but also some countries. Yeah, if you see, some countries are just much more causing more problems, and of course, some people also suffer more than others. So, from a social point of view, it's important, a political point of view, it's important to mention this. Also, the Earth as a geological entity, I think we can also have other conceptions of Earth. Earth as entangled with the life world of human beings. So, the naturalism coming from geology that goes into this concept is maybe also problematic and can be criticized, especially by the humanities and social science. So this is a perennial problem of different kinds of epistemologies that we have and metaphysics that we have also even within the university. But that being said, I think it can be a nice lens to look at the film and at the problems because, one could say the film shows that Earth more as a kind of condition that makes human life and existence possible, and if there is something wrong with Earth, then we're also in trouble, and so the out of balance is caused by that. Also, one can question this notion of second nature because maybe there's just one techno nature in the Anthropocene. So this raises again this questions like what is technology, what is nature, what is human, what is not human, and in the end also are these terms that we use like technology, nature, human, are they still adequate today to describe what is happening or to cope with what is happening? We have today the post-humanities, for example, and we have post-humanism, where the notion of the human is questioned, the notion of nature as a separate thing or indeed as a kind of paradise can also be questioned. Technology, is it just this thing or is it a milieu, and how does it relate to the natural environment? So I think by means of the movie and by means of discussions in philosophy of technology, we can raise these questions, and we have to raise these questions. And as people working in philosophy, in theory, and so on, we have to, it's our job actually to question the concepts we work with and to try to maybe craft new ones or to adapt them, tinker and play with the concepts. So I'm trying to do that in my writings. Then also the question, we are watching this self-destruction in the movie. As Benjamin calls it, it might be an aesthetic pleasure of the first order, and he was mainly thinking of Second World War context. But the Thanatos is not gone because the Second World War has ended, and so there already many years. Luckily, we live in peace, but we have the destruction of nature. For example, we have other violence in our society. So, how is this? If we look at works like Koyaanisqatsi, but also at works in literature about violence in society, for example, is this how to deal with this? Because we derive aesthetic pleasure from it, you know. There is the sublime in it, or there is the pleasure of seeing these images. It's interesting images, but how ethically to deal with? So the problem ethics, aesthetics. And also it raises the problem of the new nature again, like if patterns continue, is this kind of destructive patterns, or is there another possibility? Because one could also say like, well, maybe there is another option too. The same questions can be asked about new media and technologies. Is there distance and alienation? And thinking about Benjamin, who criticized fascism, is there some kind of fascism in there, or is it no problem that it is political, because maybe this aestheticization of nature, this is already political always, and maybe it's not such a problem. I don't know. It's a very open question for me. Here, this is another little video to think about these things. So we see a lot of reports, visual images of climate change. So when we think about climate changes, we don't think just about a word. We don't have the image of the word only. We have also images that come to us through news programs, documentaries, and so on. For example, these kind of images of ice melting. There are also the images of the ice bear who is there alone on his part of ice, and has problems to swim to the other side because there's too much water. So these kind of images, they, I think they haunt us, and at the same time, it's beautiful. So it's aesthetically beautiful. There is sublimity in there, but they also have this ethical message, which can be described in terms of Anthropocene, and which also comes, I think, in Koyaanisqatsi, this kind of images. But here now, I think we also have them on the news programs. We have them in documentaries. So are we? Yeah, it seems like we are watching our self-destruction and derive aesthetic pleasure from it. So again, how to deal with that, I don't know, but it shows for sure that we are still romantic somehow. To conclude, I have to, yeah, okay. So I think Koyaanisqatsi shows our ambiguous relation to technology and to nature, often from a romantic angle. But romantic then also in the sense that there can be also positive sides to it. I think next to all the threats and the alienation that's in there, maybe we could also see the possibility of new interesting patterns. So maybe the new patterns are not necessarily bad. So I want to end with a positive note, because it seems to me that the romantic opposition between the pre-modern modern world is very problematic, and so maybe the new media, including new moving images, can also give us new patterns that are not the same as the ones we know from nature, but also not the same as the patterns and narratives that we have in modernity. Or in modernity for that matter, because it's not fundamentally different. So I want to end with that question: Can we have this more positive view, and also can we have a non-romantic view? I think this is very difficult because, for example, if we imagine the modern world, we often end up with a narrative where, of this kind of paradise lost, and how can we imagine this new world that is not modern but also not the past? Remains a perennial problem for modern people. And I think this kind of question is important for philosophy of technology too, and environmental philosophy. How can we find a new relation to nature and technology that somehow gets out of this box? One important thing to do is, of course, to already be sensitive to diversity in terms of cultures and places, because this finding of new possibilities doesn't only happen here or in Europe. I think we don't have a pre-modern world anymore. Everywhere on the planet we have modern cultures. There's different kinds of modernity, and so maybe we can learn from each other's different versions of modernity and try to find there, maybe in the margins, some non-modern thing which is not just going back to the past. But this is very vague, this thinking, because to think it's very difficult, I think, and I think the images, but also other artistic practices and so on, can help us to deal with that. So personally, the last years, I'm very interested in movement and in more temporal forms of art, music, dance, performance, and so on. And to the extent that they manage to do something that film doesn't do, one can ask, like, is there something like post-film? I'm sure there is already a lot of thinking about that in film studies. And does it matter really how we call it? Also, Koyaanisqatsi itself, right? Is it a film or is it something else? It has moving images, but moving images can be used in all kind of art forms, and nowadays many people mix all kind of media. I mean, in a dance, for example, can also be seen from the point of view of moving images. So I ask this kind of questions because it's part of philosophy of technology and philosophy of media to, of course, question the medium. And that includes questioning, of course, also philosophy and theory and working with texts as a medium, as doing words, giving this presentation. So I'm more and more interested in, are there ways to kind of reflect and comment on our condition that are non-text based, that are not philosophy in the classic sense, but are still philosophically interesting somehow, or that deal with the questions. So I'm personally more and more talking to artists and see what comes out of that. But thank you for your attention.
Obrigado, Mark, pela interessante exposição sobre as relações em tecnologia, ambiente e também arte, né, como você colocou agora no final. O Mark, além de pensador, ele também é pintor, poeta e pianista, né? Isso ele não contou, talvez por modéstia. A little bit. Antes das perguntas, queria avisar também que o professor Mark estará amanhã no Filocom fazendo uma palestra sobre arte, sobre a questão se os seres artificiais podem produzir arte ou não, ou o que é arte. Em última análise, né, qual é o conceito que você tem hoje da arte. Amanhã à tarde no Filocom. Então, eu abriria agora a parte das perguntas para quem quiser fazer. Se puder fazer já em inglês, facilita. Se não, em português, né? Aí alguém gentilmente faria uma tradução rápida para... Diga. Diga o nome também, por favor.
Yes, thank you for your question. That's a very good question. I think in modernity we are obsessed by control, and it's true that in a sense we never had control. We never had full control over our bodies, over nature, over other people, of course. Already from the time of my PhD thesis, I've been interested in this question about non-control, and it's very interesting. I think though what is different is that like when I use a tool to make something, then I have a fair amount of control over it. The tool is more adapted to me. For example, the many philosophers of technology give the example of the hammer and the nail. Okay, I don't have full control. There can always go something wrong, but in general, the hammer is kind of made to the shape of my hand, more or less, and apparently in the past even more so. So it would have a better grip. So if I hammer in a nail, I have a fair amount of control, and whereas if I use social media, for example, I find myself in this huge sea of data, and I don't have the same amount of control over the environment there. So I think there's still a difference. But the term out of balance for me is very much, I see it as easily to be interpreted as a romantic notion of a time when things were totally in balance, right? So the question is, have we been humans any time in balance, or are we the kind of unbalanced creatures? I would go for the second one, that we are by definition out of balance. There's also a lot of conflict. So yes, there's always conflict. Yes, there's always movement, change. Yes, I agree.
Outra pergunta aí, o Gilson Schwartz.
The one term that was absent from this is gender.
Mm-hmm.
Since Kant, gender and the feminine is introduced, only the male has the self-reflective ability to face the sublime. So to what extent technology, as a matter of fact, is a product of this male domination? Do you see any connection between this romantic approach
Mm-hmm.
nowadays of the feminist question, how women view, how the feminine is related to domination, which is almost synonymous to technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that question. In another talk, I talked more about this gender question when I talked about how robots are embedded in a culture where there's also these gender questions, and how in the material design of the robot there could be links to gender. So I am sensitive to this kind of questions. In this case, I did not talk about it, but I think your question is very relevant. To answer directly to the question, I don't know if the male is only about dominance or the female is only about non-dominance or something else. There are also feminists who, of course, question that there is something like a feminine essence or a male essence for that reason. So also, if we use these terms, in this case the masculine and feminine, what do we add to the analysis rather than saying just there's domination and non-domination. What do we add when we use the words masculine, feminine? So if there is something we can add, then we should discuss about it. So I didn't see immediately what we can add here, but yes, I mean there's definitely an argument around that says that this desire for control and domination, which I've called just the modern desire for control, and that this is a kind of male thing. But yeah, I don't know if that's a helpful way of doing or not. But we can discuss about it. It's yeah, it's good that you bring up the question.
Mais uma pergunta? Por favor.
Can you say the name of the author again? Wasser? Like V-A-S-S? Oh, like the German word for water, Wasser. Okay, yeah. Thank you for your questions. I assume that it was because of the language that you translated. Okay. Both names I don't know. So would it be possible in 2 sentences to say, or it's very short to say something about maybe one of the works that you mentioned, especially the one from here that you mentioned? Maybe this could be interesting for me to know.
Pode fazer uma pergunta? Milton Santos, em relação a isso? Positivo da globalização, nesse caso. Você está falando então das migrações internas, externas?
Na verdade, as internas e as externas, né? Ele acaba criando as fronteiras. Porque os indígenas, as fronteiras, elas não existem, né? Então, essas fronteiras, elas chegaram e quebraram e cortaram completamente a relação que eles tinham. Então, tem algumas aldeias que foram separadas de países, mas eles continuam numa unidade.
Globalization, because Indians, they have their own way of connecting themselves. Here, that's another problem, very apparent that occurs here with Indians. I don't know if in the US, the Indians have also their ways of connecting themselves using or not using globalization. Because sometimes globalization is not good for them, and other times they are good for them, for the Indians. But this movement of migration from peoples continents in very wide space. And then I don't know if she wants to answer if it's good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, so I did not, I don't know so much about the specific way how indigenous people here relate to globalization, but it's for me it's part how we all have to deal with modernity, and that might be very specific ways how to on the one hand maybe adopt a lot from the outside, go everywhere, whether it's by travel or by new media, and become actually just like everyone else, or if it's if there is some, as I understood from Ciro's translation, that there's maybe also some resistance to globalization, but I think this is there might be specific characteristics for here. But in general, I think there is also even in Europe resistance in the countryside, also in cities. Some people are very conservative and resist globalization. But maybe there can be also different ways. So maybe it doesn't have to be conservative. Maybe there can be people who do it differently. I don't know, but it definitely relates to the problem of modernity. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure if I understood the question, but it's about temporality in existence, right? Yeah. Yes. Yes, because they really of yes. Yes, I think what I find specific about this kind of artistic forms is that they, because they especially dance show movement. They don't only show a pattern of movement, but they show movement itself also, and they make us think if maybe our daily life is also a movement, and has patterns, and so I would say that they bring out the temporality of our life itself. So maybe other art forms can do that too, but they're particularly good in doing that, I think. What this film is good in showing is to make us think like, how is the temporality of my life related to the temporality of the bigger events or the bigger changes. They're my movements, but doesn't show so much the individual movements. Here it's really the movements of the art or what happens in the landscapes, the urban landscapes and the natural landscapes. The big movements that technology makes. So I think maybe, I mean, my point was not so much that we should only look at specific art forms or at specific, even specific forms of temporality, but that it's part of our existence, and maybe we can think about how the temporality of our life narrative and our daily routines, how that relates to the bigger picture, which is always a moving picture also. So the earth, there are changes like this climate change, right? So that climate change that has a very different temporality. The geological time is very different than the time of our individual lives. And is again different from the time of the evolution of our societies. So there are these different times. So maybe it could be interesting to think about how they relate to one another. And for us it's an existential question how we relate to these bigger times.
Deteriorating. I mean, we see the deterioration of this urban landscape as pointing out to the return to nature.
Okay, so the deterioration of the urban landscape.
As a return to nature.
Yes, because it could be read as showing that the architectures of modern society, that they are basically corrupt and that they break down, and then in the film there doesn't seem to be another alternative than going back to the stuff that happens in nature and the tribal way of relating to what happens in nature. I hope that there is another way, a third way, but this is what the film shows, I think.
Yeah, I feel that when it shows the natural landscape, it's a place where we do not belong. And then the deteriorating urban landscape is also a place we do not belong. I don't know.
Okay, so they're both hostile to yeah. This was also definitely one of the interpretations, and they're both hostile. So okay, so against that, then the question is, what would be a non-hostile environment, right? And did the tribal people have such an environment, or did it never existed? And how can we make a more hospitable world and a more hospitable way of living? Yes, I mean this is definitely also a good interpretation, and can be related to also the philosophy of technology questions then, because it's not clear then what kind of technology is that then that we need for for creating this hospitable place, because of course many of the architects that made all this, their purpose was of course not to make a scary place to live in, or an inhospitable place. They all tried to make homes, but they failed to do so. That remains a question how to do that. Yes. Yes.
And yes, how catalysts change or can kill some forms of our perception, you know, our system perception. Like we are more able, not able, but I think we are more tend to consume and not feel, feel the things. I mean, we go to the cinema, we just stay at the Facebook, but something that is more sensible. You have to be more sensible to feel. I think this kind of forms of, I don't know if it's dying, but of course it's not the majority are doing. You know? So what is the responsibility of the large corporation and the system, of course, they are in.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think it's definitely the large corporations have a huge responsibility here, because they might promote a way of relating to the environment and to each other that produces alienation. So I think they, by doing what they do, I think they do not only sell us products and services, they also shape the way we relate to nature and to one another. And in particular, with the new media, I think they, by turning us into a kind of cows for data and selling the data, by putting us under surveillance, I don't see how they contribute to finding a way of life that makes us less alienated and creates this more hospitable place. So I think I think they should also think about how can they contribute to solving the problems. One issue there is, you mentioned, like, making the technology more sophisticated, is that the typical modern technological way of responding to all these problems like climate change and Anthropocene is to say, like, well, we just need to find a technological solution, a technological fix. And so that's the geoengineering is an example of that, where you just say, like, well, okay, we messed up the climate, but we can, put something in the air, kind of something that mirrors back the sun rays, and like huge solutions which even more intervene in the Earth's cores, in a way, or in the future of the planet. So, but that's not really a different solution. It's just more of the same. So, and it creates a kind of hyper Anthropocene where we are totally, using more technology to solve problems that are created by technology. So I think we need to get out of this. But the difficulty I then see is that if we try to imagine literally also images of this state where in condition where you don't have that anymore, then can we imagine something that doesn't just do this romantic pattern again and this romantic narrative? This is the challenge.
Gilson? One more question. Going back to the film. I remember when I watched this film in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
It was presented here at the Museum of Art.
Okay. Art, not in the film theater. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Going back to the film, and now I'm beginning to maybe remember what I felt when I saw the film. And after all these years, maybe I'm still feeling the same. And that is, what if the film, after all, says nothing? Because we are discussing what is the possible meaning of this film, that the relation between technology, nature, and the human. But even going about influence about technology of images. There's absolutely nothing in common between nature and nurture, environment and man and ecology and everything. It's just about look how fancy technology can be.
Mm.
You can have this time-lapse technique.
Mm.
And this is, I think about all these documentaries we see, National Geographic, all these cable TV networks, fantastic production, David Attenborough narrating the wildlife,
Yes.
spectacular camera that seems to go inside the beak of the bird and all that. And it says nothing. It says, oh, now let's see how the lions make. It's just curiosity. And it's technology for its own sake. Maybe it's that just a film about images, just as Philip Glass, his music about music. It doesn't want to tell any story. It's not Wagnerian. It doesn't look for a myth or some mythological or archetypical symbol or exactly. It's just music about music, aestheticism about music. Would that be an option?
Thanks for the question, because it stimulates thinking further about this. I think you exaggerate, because I think, of course, part of what happens is that that the medium is about the medium, of course. So it does show, like, look, this time lapse thing, what we can do, and we like this we can in a way detect the patterns, whatever the patterns are. So that's true, that this is also happening there, but then I think it's not because it's only visual that we cannot find the meanings, and I think there are meanings in it. Also in Philip's Glass music, when I first heard it, I was also more thinking in terms of meaningless patterns. But then when I listened more to the music, and when you also see for what the music is used, it's almost literally romantic. There is a lot content also there. So yeah, but you're right. We have these both sides, and after McLuhan, we cannot no longer just talk about the message. So this is definitely also about film and about the capacity of film to show also similarities in movement, and but with a specific technique. And indeed, nowadays, I mean, when we look at this film nowadays, the time lapse thing doesn't strike us as special anymore, because it has been used so much after that I mean, maybe many people here didn't even notice it, that it was used, the technique, right? Because we're so used to it. But back then, this was part of what was new, and the specific way he did it was very good. Something I was also thinking about, of course, some people might bring up the question of nihilism when we talk about no meaning. What does no meaning is? If we have the large, what is it to not read it in a romantic way? For example, see the sublime in these images of nature. We can maybe some people say, like, yeah, this shows that nature can do without us, and that there is no meaning, and we just think that there is meaning, but there is this and nothing more. So that. Mm. Mm.
The only thing that I can, after all, realize that we are all
Mm.
is that we are
Yes.
towards that.
But then here I realize that there is the possibility of my own death through the images of nature, and even of the urban landscape that decays, which we think always buildings are permanent. No, they're not, and so on. Yes. Mm. Yes, so that's a more like existentialist reading. Yes. Mm. Okay. Thanks for cheering us up at the end of the lecture. Okay. This is your question, right? Yes. Okay. Just to know. Okay. Yes. Yes. Mm. 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 Okay, thanks for the question. So first of all, I think for me, I generally actually do agree with literature that says that there's moral disengagement, but it was a footnote to say like there might be a little bit empathy going on through the medium of this camera that comes very close. Because it's wrong that, I mean, otherwise if we Skype, for example, it doesn't mean that we don't have any personal contact or something, right? So I wanted to have a more nuanced discussion from the point of view of new media and technologies. But generally, you're right. I try to be a bit to be a bit contrary. With the more intelligent technologies, of course, to the extent that there's no human anymore involved, there is no possibility of empathy, because empathy goes for me through the embodied feeling and not some kind of theory of mind, embodied feeling, and this is only possible as humans because we can have emotions. Yes.
Muito bem, então agradecemos ao Mark e ao professor Mark Coeckelbergh por estar aqui e por nos proporcionar essa discussão bastante interessante, ilustrativa e enriquecedora. Né? O professor Mark esteve ontem no EA fazendo uma palestra sobre Wittgenstein e está hoje aqui, como eu falei, amanhã ele estará aqui conosco na ECA e deverá partir na quinta-feira de Brasília. Então, a Universidade de São Paulo agradece a participação do professor Mark. Eu agradeço também vocês por estarem aqui, por terem participado aqui dentro do nosso programa de pós-graduação e por terem assistido e enriquecido esse debate. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado.